Okay, good morning. It's July 2nd, 2020. And could you tell me your full name, please?
The name on my birth certificate is Valentine Morris Victor Patarini. My family all called me Junior, and in fact most of the people in my neighborhood called me Junior. As I got older, I went more to the Italian pronunciation, and I'm now known as Valentino M. Patarini, and all of my legal documents are signed with that name.
Okay, and can you tell me when and where you were born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, July 27th, 1935, at St. Luke's Hospital, which is just south of the Loop in Chicago. I don't even know if that hospital still exists. If it does, it has probably been bought up by some big medical firm.
And your parents' names are?
My father's name on his naturalization papers were Valentine Anthony Patarini, and the name on my mother's was Antoinette Patarini. Interesting thing about that is that for all her life she was known as Jenny, and on the back of her naturalization papers, which were signed in July of 1942, she officially changed her name to Jenny. And as I said, to the best of my knowledge, all my growing up years, everyone always referred to her as Jenny.
Okay, and where were they born? And, maybe the story of their immigration since...
Okay, well, my father was born in, both my mother and father were born in Italy. My father was born in Lucene, which is in the Lombardo region of Italy. His father's name, we believe, is Mauricio. The name Mauricio has some mystery within the family. We believe that I have an uncle named that. Believe that that is where the Morris came from in my name. And Morris was also the name of my Uncle Albert's first son. So we believe that my grandfather's name was Maurizio. Oh, let's see, my mother was born in Pratagiloni, Italy, which is in the Piemonte region. Both the Lombardo and Piemonte regions are in the north. My mother's name was Traccioli, and her mother's first name was Catherine. Her mother's maiden name was Pumanto.
Okay, very good. And do you know some of the dates or times, or how they came to America from Italy, or the circumstances or timing story of that?
Okay, my excuse me, my father was 17 when he came to the U.S. The ship's manifest indicated that he was coming here to meet his brother, again, Maurizio, in Pittsburgh. I know that he settled in Pennsylvania and that he went to work in the coal mines. He was a coal miner for almost all of his life. My mother came over, I believe she was 3 years old. Her father had preceded her mother and her sister and her, presumably to get work and save money to bring them over. They settled in Clinton, Indiana, where my grandfather, her father, worked as a coal miner.
Okay. And so, and again, just trying to lock down some dates, which I know we have paperwork for, but, so if your father was 17 when he emigrated, what year what year was he born? And we can do the math. Do you know
I believe he was born in 1885. I think that sounds right. So if he was 17, 80, I'd been 19, yeah, about 1902, 1903. Yeah, I remember that now from doing the search on the Ellis Island site.
Okay, very good. And again, you talked a little bit about your grandparents, so you pretty much have that locked down. What about your siblings' names and birth order, and if you know even places and dates, that's all good info?
Well, okay. I have three sisters, Lottie Catherine, Vera, and I don't know what her middle name is, and the youngest sister was Aurora. They were 18, 16, and 14 when I was born. Lottie was 18, Vera 16, and Aurora was 14. They were all born in different states because as one mine would play out, my father would move on to another location. My sister Lottie was born in Iowa. I'm not sure the exact town. My sister Vera was born in Colorado. And Aurora was born in Indiana. Apparently they moved back to Indiana. And I'm not sure what the purpose of that was, whether it was again to work in the coal mines.
Okay. So, you were born in Chicago, and is that where you grew up and spent your childhood?
Yeah. Yeah, I was born and raised in Chicago. Grew up in what was known as the Grand Crossing area. Predominantly Italian neighborhood. I have a vague recollection of a building on Greenwood Avenue, but most of my growing up years were spent on Dobson Avenue, which was right across the street from Grand Crossing Park. We lived on the second floor front of a four-flat building. Grew up in the neighborhood. We lived there for until probably my sophomore year. At that point, a couple who had lived in the neighborhood but moved away came back to the neighborhood, bought the building, and since our apartment was the biggest of the four flats, they wanted that apartment. At that point, both my mother was working, and of course my sister was, and apparently they felt they had enough money. They chose to buy a house on Avalon Avenue, which was a short walk from the Grand Crossing area.
Okay. So where did you go to elementary school? And again, let's rewind a little bit to your childhood and earlier years.
Okay, again, I went to Cornell Grammar School, which was about a 4 to 6 block walk from Dobson. Went there from kindergarten through 8th grade. From there, I went to Hirsch High School for 4 years. Hirsch was on the other side of Grand Crossing Park from Dobson Avenue. So it was like a 2-block walk from home to high school. High school was not a big, memorable time in my life. I was not a particularly good student. I like to say that I graduated in the upper half of the bottom half of my graduating class. I had some friends in high school, but none that I hung around with. Most of my friends and buddies were neighborhood guys that I had grown up with.
Now, when you were living there, and how old were you when your father passed away and your mom had to take on a job, and were your sisters living with you at that point? They were much older than you, so kind of speak to that if you would.
Yeah, okay, well, Lottie never married, and she continued to live with us. Aurora married Dom, and for a while they rented an apartment about half a dozen houses up Dobson from us. When we first moved into Dobson, the family downstairs, the Rivolis, the father was a policeman. I believe he was a sergeant, but he was also the precinct captain. And he got my mother involved in a peripheral fashion in the local politics. She worked at the voting sites, attended some rallies, and consequently, not to suggest that politics played any part in it, she was able to get a job as the ladies' locker room attendant at Grand Crossing Park, which was right across the street. And that's where she worked until she retired. I'm not sure, I was probably preteen. I'm sure I was preteen when she got her job at the park. Put a little pressure on me because my mother worked there. That's where I hung out. That's where we did everything. So I had to be very careful that I didn't do anything wrong, because they would tell my mother, and then my mother would yell at me. And so I had to kind of walk very gently. But still, it was a very nice time. She worked from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 10. At the time, Lottie was still living home, and I would eat many of my meals with Aurora.
And again, any memories of the end of the Depression or World War II, or any awareness of that as a child, or how it impacted your father's work? Or
Well, my father, of course, not really sure what his education was. I would be surprised if he did anything more than grammar school while he was in Italy. So most of the jobs he had were very low-skilled, coal mining and other stuff. So of course, when jobs became scarce, he was amongst the first to be let go. I remember laying on the couch in the front room with him while we listened to all of the soap operas.
on radio, not TV?
Oh yeah, now on radio, yeah. My one recollection of the war really goes back to not at the end of the war, at the end of the European War, VE Day. This, I think, was in July. It was in the summer. And the neighborhood had a huge parade. Drove cars around Dobson and then around Greenwood, made a big loop. Honking horns, people cheering. There were several of the guys who lived in the neighborhood who were in the service, were home on leave. And of course, they were all treated as heroes. I thought that that was a good deal because from now on, uh, every July we would have a big celebration, and it turned out that now we're lucky if you hear about it on the news. But that's really, as far as I was going on 13. The end of my 7th grade in grammar school. My father had been quite ill. He always had a hacking cough, which he attributed to pneumonia, and which I now, in retrospect, suspect that it was probably black lung disease, given the years that he spent in the coal mines. Anyway, Memorial Day of, I guess it would have been 1948. My mother and sisters went to the hospital because my father, at that point, he had gotten quite ill. My mother took him to St. Luke's Hospital. And they went to see him, and I was home with Dom. And some of my buddies were going to the Museum of Science and Industry. And back in those days, when you were 12, 13, it was nothing to jump on public transportation, go to the ball game, go to Soldiers Field, watch a football game, without adult companionship. And I asked Dom, I said, hey, they're going, is it okay if I go with them? And Dom, of course, realized how serious it was. And I, of course, being the baby, was never told anything. So I didn't know how serious it was. And so Dom, I guess, kind of not knowing what else to do, said, yeah, go ahead. Well, when I came home, everybody was sitting in the front room with long faces, and I was very excited to tell them everything we had seen at the museum. And Aurora told me that my father had died. Now, poor Aurora seemed to be the one who always was the harbinger of ill things. She's the one who told us when Vera died. She's the one who told us when they had to put my mother in a nursing home. She's the one who told us when my mother passed away. It seemed like it always fell on her to be the bearer of bad news. So anyway, at that point, there were the three of us then, Lottie, my mother, and I, living on Dobson. And it was shortly thereafter that we were, well, I hesitate to say forced to move, but were asked to move, and we bought the house on Avalon.
Now, both Vera and Aurora's new husbands, were in the service during World War II. Was there any awareness of that again, you were the youngest, and they did tend to shelter you from things, but was there any awareness of that, or their being missing, or your sisters being stressed out over that?
Yeah, yes.
Vera's husband was
in the Army Air Corps.
Right? Was?
Army, because at that point there was no Air Force.
Right.
It was the Army Air Corps. And he was stationed in Bossier Field, Louisiana. And Dom was stationed in San Diego. Now, I have a recollection of Aurora and Dom being engaged before Dom went into the service. It's not clear to me that Vera and Earl were engaged, but they were certainly a couple. both Vera and Aurora went to their respective significant others to visit them and were married in at those military bases. So neither my mother nor father saw either of their daughters get married. Vera stayed in Louisiana because Earl was pretty much stationed there through the whole war. But Aurora came back home and lived with us. Dom did get stationed on one of the islands in the Pacific, but I believe that it was an occupied island. I don't think he was ever a battlefield corpsman. He was more of a hospital corpsman. He was in the Navy, but he dealt mostly with Marines.
Anything about high school activities, sports, jobs, girlfriends?
Well,
Before.
I had some kind of a job from I don't know. I'm guessing 11 or 12. I started delivering the Chicago Herald News. Again, a newspaper which is no longer in existence. I did that for a number of years. I also worked at a newsstand on Saturdays and Sundays. Saturdays was at the IC Suburban Station, and Sundays was out in front of St. Francis de Paul at church, selling papers to the people as they came out of Mass. I worked those for a while. When I was 15, Dom owned a food and liquor store, and I went to work for him as basically a stock boy, doing stock boy things, putting merchandise on the shelves, making sure that there was beer in the coolers, that they were on display and everything, general cleaning up of the area, stuff like that. I worked for him for several years until my senior year. At that point, Dom's lease ran out and his landlord wanted to raise his rent. And Dom explained to him that he couldn't afford it because they had just opened a new high-low supermarket 2 blocks down from his place, and it was cutting into his grocery business quite a bit, and the landlord wasn't hearing any of that stuff. Oh, no. And Don said, look, I'm going to have to close. I can't do it. And the guy says, well, I'll run it to somebody else then. So Dom did have to close. And not good for him, but fortuitous for me. What that allowed me to do was to be on the wrestling team my senior year. Up to that point, I was busy working. I couldn't take the time off. So I wrestled the 1 year. Again, made some acquaintances with the guys on the wrestling team, but not guys that I hung out with after school. Most of my time was spent with the park guys. As I got older and we moved to Avalon, it got to be kind of a pain in the hind end to have to walk from Avalon all the way to the park and then hang out and then walk all the way back. And one evening I was walking one of our dogs, Sandy. And I ran into a guy that I had a class with that I knew. And we stopped to chat of this, that, and the other thing. And I don't remember the circumstances. I don't remember whether it was a party or they were a group of them were getting together for something. And he said, well, you know, we're such and such, why don't you join us? I said, shit, why not? So I did, and from that point on, that's the group that I hung out with, and that's the group that I hesitate to say grew old with, but yeah. The one buddy's name was Jack Quirk. Jack, as a matter of fact, was the guy who gave me some driving lessons, but that's another story we'll get to. Jim Banghart and his brother Jack were part of the group. Big Bob Johnson was part of the group, and then there were various and sundry girls also. But I never really had a girlfriend. I like to think that I matured later. We hung out together. One of the fellas in the group, John Niebuhr, he came up with the idea. He said that, you know, this was still during the Korean War, and we had all had to register for the draft, and there was a possibility we would be drafted. So John came up with the idea that we joined the Navy Reserve. And that way, if we were drafted, we could apply for active duty through the Navy, and we go into the Navy rather than the Army. So John, myself, and Jack Quirk, and I don't remember whether Bob Johnson did or not. But anyway, I was 17 and my mother had to sign for me, and she did it reluctantly. I think the argument that if I got drafted, at least this way I would go in the Navy and not wind up in Korea in some foxhole.
So what year did you graduate Hirsch High?
Okay, I graduated Hirsch in June of 1953. Got a job with an insurance company downtown as an insurance underwriter trainee. That only lasted a couple of months. That was clearly not in my background, so I quit. And I applied for a job at U.S. Steel. My goal was to get a job at the steel mills and make $2 an hour. That was big time. Well, I went there and took the interview, and the guy offered me the job as an oiler, whatever the hell that was. And I think the starting pay was like $1.50 or $1.60 an hour, and it was a swing shift, which meant weekdays, week afternoons, weeknights. And I decided, no, that wasn't for me either. So my mother told me she had been talking to a friend of hers from the neighborhood whose son was working as a machinist apprentice for the Illinois Central Railroad, and that they were hiring. So I thought, hey, that sounds like a good idea. So I went down, applied for that, got the job, and worked as a machinist apprentice for about a year. About a year. At that point, again, I don't know what was critical about the timing, but John Niebuhr, again, suggested, why don't we apply for active duty? You get that over with, out of the way. Nobody had any girlfriends or anything, so that seemed like a good time. So we did, and we applied for active duty. Quirk changed his mind. He decided that the Navy wasn't for him, that he was really more Army. So he opted to join the Army. Fine, his choice. So October 15th of 54, I went on active duty and reported to Anacostia Naval Station in Washington, where I was from there assigned to the icebreaker USS Edisto, which was stationed in Boston. John was also assigned an icebreaker in Boston, the Atka. And we thought that was a pretty good deal. You know, probably we were going to be working together and get to spend some time together. Well, the way it turned out is that when, when we were on station, the Atka was in Boston being repaired. And when we were in Boston being repaired, the Atka was out to sea. And I think maybe we spent 2, maybe 3 weeks in Boston at the same time. But getting back to the October 15th reporting for duty date, it turns out to have been very fortuitous, because Congress declared the end of the Korean conflict at the end of October. I guess that 30 days after to October 30th. Which meant that ended the GI Bill. So by going on active duty on October the 15th, I qualified for the GI Bill and was able to use that to get through 3 or 4 years of college. So,
So you're in the Navy and basically stationed in Boston. That was the home port for your
that was
your
the
ship?
home port for the ship. While I was there, we made 2 trips north on station, doing oceanographic readings and helping cargo ships that had gotten stuck in the ice, towing them out. We were on station to assist in getting the cargo ships in to get supplies into the distant early warning systems that were up in the Canadian area. We did 2 of those trips, and then 1 trip to the South Pole. We left on, I remember we left on Halloween of 1955 and headed south. We stopped off in New Zealand, did some shore leave there, headed to the South Pole. We were part of what was referred to as Task Force 43. There were 5 ships, and our task was to set up the first of the wintering over stations at the Antarctic for the scientists. There were 5 ships. There were, no, 7 ships. I take that back. 7 ships. There were 3 icebreakers, 2 cargo ships, and 2 oil tankers. We were down there about 4 months and then headed back to Boston. While we were in Boston, we got the results of my third-class boatswain exam, and I had passed it and was promoted to third-class boatswain, which in those days was a big deal. And stayed in Boston until I was discharged, which is kind of another story. When I went in to the reserves, I went in under what they call a kiddie cruise, which meant I was to be discharged on the day before my 21st birthday. Congress, after that, passed what they call the Universal Military Training Act, which meant that every able-bodied man had an 8-year obligation to the military. This could include active reserve, active duty, inactive reserve, but you were available for 8 years. The Edisto, after we got back from the South Pole and we're doing some refitting, the Edisto was going on another 3-month cruise up to the North Pole. And since I was going to be due to be discharged within 3 or 4 weeks, they decided it wasn't worth their while to take me up there and then fly me back. So I was transferred to another icebreaker that was in port, for the remainder of my enlistment. Well, when I got to the new ship, the yeoman said, okay, you're due to be discharged October 15th. And I said, whoa, no, wait a minute. No. I'm due to get out July 26th. I'm on the kiddie cruise. And he says, oh, no, there are no more kiddie cruises. You're here till the October 15th. So I said, no, I got to do something about that. Excuse me. I had a lot of leave on the books. And at this point, I had decided that since I had the military stipend to go to school, I might as well do that. So Lottie set me up with an interview with someone who gave me an interest and aptitude test. So I put in for leave, went home, took the test. The guy went over it with me and said, well, it looks like you could probably be a dentist. And I decided, no, that wasn't the thing. He said, well, the other thing is that you could be an engineer. This new field of engineering, ceramic engineering, I said, I'll give that a try. So then I had to go back to Boston and put in for an early discharge, which fortunately was granted. So I was able to get out in time. Thing that ticked me off, though, is that I was planning on saving all of that leave that I had built up because I'd get paid for it, for not what I didn't use. Well, I had to use it up in order to get home to take the test and what have you. So I did not have much leave when I got out. From that point, I went to the Chicago branch of the University of Illinois, which at that point was called Navy Pier. It was a 2-year branch. Enrolled in engineering. Somehow got involved with a group there, and Sandy and I were talking about this the other day, and neither one of us can come up with an explanation as to how I got connected with them. I did not have any classes with any of them. One of the girls in the group was a girl by the name of Barb Slazewski, who had gone to Bowen and had my sister Lottie as a gym teacher. So as best we can figure out, somehow Barb must have found out that my name was Patarini and made the connection, and it went from there, and I started hanging around with her and her group. We would get together frequently and have various parties at different people's houses. Actually, I brought in the group from around Avalon, and they kind of joined the group also. One of the girls was having a going back to school party in September. And your mother, Sandy, was on the bus coming back from a studio having her picture taken. She was apparently going to give a picture to her parents for Christmas or something. And Barb was on the same bus, and they, oh, hi, how you doing, what are you doing, all of that kind of stuff. And Barb said, well, we're having this party at Sharon's house. If you're not doing anything, why don't you come? And she wasn't doing anything, so she said, yeah, okay. So she came to the party, and I met her there, and it just took off from there. She was the last girl that I ever dated from that point on. We dated for, I think, 3 years, part of which time we were engaged. And I was going to school at the time. She was working and going to school part-time. And finally, going into my junior year, I guess she had had enough of it and decided that it was time for us to get married. So we did. We got married. At this point, I was downstate at Champaign-Urbana. And so we bought a trailer and lived in the trailer. She got a job in Champaign, moved down there, and went to school there for 3 years. While I was there, the GI Bill ran out, and so I got a part-time job in the ceramic department, working for one of the professors, doing some testing. And I found out that this wasn't bad. This was kind of fun. Maybe this is something that I'd like to do. So I put in for graduate school and went to graduate school for my master's degree. I went 2 summers and 1 full year and got a master's degree in September of '62. And at that point I interviewed, back off a little bit, the University of Illinois, because it was so large, had a large placement department. And companies that were looking for people would send representatives there to interview people. The students would go there, and they had lists of companies with the types of individuals they were looking for. And so I interviewed and was offered a job with what at that point was United Aircraft Research Labs in East Hartford, Connecticut. And I took the job, and we moved to Connecticut in September, and in December, Lori was born.
So 63.
62.
62, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, wait a minute. Yeah,
Yes.
62.
Yeah. Now you were married, you skipped over the date of the wedding.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, no, just
Yeah.
archive it.
September 5th, 1959. 9559.
And you were already living at Champaign-Urbana, and then Mom moved down when you got married. Is that
Yeah,
kind of how
that is right. I did move down there. I think I was down there a semester without her. So I went down there in February, and we were married that following September. And it's funny because toward the end of that semester, which would have been June, the woman who ran the independent housing that we were staying at was looking for a, I guess, resident assistant. I think that's what they're called. The fellow she had was graduating, and she offered me the job. And I said, well, you know, thank you very much. I appreciate the offer, but I'm getting married in September. She said, well, congratulations, congratulations. But yeah,
So
the ceramic engineering department was a fairly small department, so most of us hung around together. We had classes together and studied together and everything like that. So,
so it's 1962. You're newly employed at United Aircraft. Newborn child.
right.
Going into 63, I guess.
Yeah, and anyway, enjoyed the work. Everything was going along fine. About a year later, several of the people that I was working with were going to take classes graduate classes up at UConn. And it was a pretty good deal. They were one afternoon a week, late in the afternoon, and the company gave you a couple hours off to go. And I figured, hey, why not? That's a pretty good deal. So I started up at UConn. One thing led to another. Kept taking classes, and before I knew it, I pretty much had all the classes I needed for a PhD. So took my prelims and final exams, and everything was fine. So the school requirement was that you had to spend a year on campus to qualify for your PhD. So I came up with a thesis subject and worked on that for a year. Worked at it both at UConn, and I was able to use a lot of the equipment back at the labs. So that worked out real well. And my thesis advisor was a Greek Cypriot who had recently graduated with his PhD from MIT. His name was Theodolos Katamas. And we hit it off real well together, real well. So went through with that and got my PhD in '72. So it took about 10 years going part-time. And continued at the research center. I did take a couple of job interviews while I was there. I wanted to see if there was something better out there. Got a couple of offers, but they just didn't sound like all that good a fit. I didn't really see there was that much of a room for advancement beyond what opportunities I had there at the labs. And no, it meant pulling up and moving to a new area, and so I stayed at the research center until I retired at 57 in January of '94. They offered a buyout package, early retirement package, that, in the words of Don Corleone, was an offer I couldn't possibly refuse. And have been retired since then and enjoying every minute of it.
All right. You had alluded to the story of learning to drive and your first car, and that I don't want to go out of sequence here, but it sounds like you had some thoughts prepared on that.
Yeah, that kind of slipped by, but that is an interesting story. I mentioned that my buddy Jack Quirk had given me some driving lessons. In fact, I should back up further than that either. All the time that I was growing up, we never had a car. We didn't need a car because the public transportation was so great, you could get anywhere in the city for peanuts. So when I turned 18, I asked my mother if she would sign for me to buy a car. Because at that point, you didn't reach age of agreement until 21. And her mantra was, no, you can't buy a car, because if you get in an accident, they'll take our house away from us. So that was her standing. So when I took this leave to come home to take the aptitude tests, at this point I was 21, and I was bound and determined I was going to buy a car. So I went out looking for cars, and I ran across this really sweet 2050 four-door,
1950, I think you mean.
1950
Four-door.
four-door emerald green V8 Mercury sedan, and I bought it. Of course, the problem was I didn't have a driver's license at the time, so I had to bring Jim, Anyway, I had to bring my buddy Jim with me so he could drive the car back home for me. So apparently at some point between then and the time I left to go back to Boston, I was able to get a driver's license. And I was planning on driving the car back to Boston. But just before I was ready to leave, my mother implored me not to drive back. Leave the car home. And I said, geez. I really wanted to have that car with me. But I could see that it was really going to cause her a great deal of worry. So I said, okay. So I left the car home, much to my chagrin. But that is the way it was. But that's it. Actually, I owned a car before Lottie owned a car.
Makes sense. Now, when you were about 40, you had a pretty serious health scare?
Yeah, yes I did. At the research center, being professional, we were given a great deal of leeway. And there was a facility about a couple blocks away called the Aircraft Club, and they had gyms there. And a bunch of us used to go over at lunchtime and play basketball. And it got to be a pretty big deal. We played 5-on-5, full court. Guys waiting on the sideline for next. Well, one time we were playing. Somebody took a shot and it came off high off the front rim, and I went up for the rebound, and coincidentally one of my teammates also went up for the rebound. We collided in midair, and I came down flat on my back. And it stunned a little bit, so I sat out for a while, then went back in and decided, no, that probably wasn't a good idea. So anyway, went back to work, everything was fine. About 3 o'clock, 3:30, I went to the bathroom, and I was basically pissing pure blood. And I figured that was not good. So I called our family doctor, PCP, and explained what the story was. He said, well, get in here. So I went in there, and at the time he had a physician's assistant working with him. And the guy said, well, here, give me a urine sample. So again, I give him a beaker full of blood. He takes one look at that, goes and gets the doctor, says, you got to see this.
It's never a good sign.
The doctor comes in. He says, well, where's the urine sample? He says, it's there. Doctor says, you better take him to the emergency room. Now, coincidentally, the hospital was right across the street from the doctor's office, so we could just walk over there. And they admitted me. They did some x-rays and found a very large tumor on my kidney. So they put me in the hospital for a couple of days to get things to settle down. And got a urologist to check things out, and he said, okay, I think we want to get an ultrasound of the kidney, see what that looks like. So I got an ultrasound. They look at it and said, well, yes, you do have a very large tumor there, I think what we will do is to operate. We don't think it's malignant, so we will just go in there and drain it. Okay, whatever works for you. So the bottom line is that when they went in, it turns out it was malignant, and they removed the entire kidney. Oh wait, no, I take that back. No, they were going to remove the tumor. That's what it was. And when they went in and saw that it was malignant, they removed the entire kidney. And it was a fairly long recuperation period for me. For whatever reason, the wound did not want to heal. It kept oozing. And they were going to give me radiation treatments, but they couldn't do it until the wound healed. And by the time the wound healed, which was a couple of months, really, they decided that if they had left any cancer back there when they removed the kidney, at this point radiation wasn't going to do any good. So, and they weren't going to put me through the radiation treatments for nothing. And apparently they got everything because nothing ever came of it.
And from your recovery of that, you started getting into running instead of playing basketball as your, exercise of choice. And that, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that. After they removed the kidney, Sandy gave me the option of stopping playing basketball or divorce. So I thought about it for a while and decided that I'd stop playing basketball. And there were some guys, there was a large contingent of guys that came to the aircraft club at noontime and ran. I don't know how I got tied up with them. Oh no, I'm backing up. There were two guys from the labs, technicians, who were running. So I started running with them. And I ran with them at noontime for a year or so. Then all of a sudden their administration started tightening down on the technicians and hourly people as far as things like long lunch, leaving early, stuff like that. So they had to quit running, and I picked up with a couple of other guys who were around there. One of them worked at the labs, Tony Dennis, so I knew him, and a buddy of his from Pratt named Lee Seidelman. And so I started running with them. From there, a couple of other guys from Pratt joined also. Fred Mahler, Bob Bass. No, Bob was at the research center, so he also joined us. And Barry Stoner. So it turned out that there were like 7 of us who would get there at noontime and go out and run. We finally worked our way up to 5 miles. And we did that for a while. Turned out that in order to pass the time, we would start talking about various and sundry stupid things. Some things that worked, things that were happening on. And one day somebody, and it probably was Lee, made the comment that, if anyone was ever to hear us talking, they'd think we were a bunch of bozos. So from that point on, we became the Bozos.
I think it was a delivery.
Oh, okay. I guess your mother's getting that. And we ran for quite a while together. A couple of the guys actually did marathons. I never did that. I never felt I wanted to take the time from the family that would have been required to prepare for a marathon. However, the Bozos did do a couple of team marathons. And so we ran the Hartford Marathon and one out of Rocky Neck. And again, each loop, well, I think my loops were like 6 miles, something like that. So I ran a couple of 10Ks and ran in the Manchester Turkey Day 5-mile race for years. Did that until my hip gave out on me and I had to have a hip replaced. And I want to say that was like 2006? No.
Round about there, I guess, yeah.
In 2006. And after the hip was replaced, the surgeon said I could do anything I want except I couldn't run, I couldn't play tennis, and I couldn't play racquetball. And I said, well, I don't play tennis. I haven't played racquetball in about 5 years, but I am damn sure going to miss not being able to run. So from that point on, I did a lot of bike riding. And in the winter, when it wasn't conducive to do bike riding, I would go on the elliptical machine as a way of maintaining some sort of physical conditioning, keep my cholesterol level down, and all of the rest of the good things. And like that.
All right, well, we're just a little bit over an hour here. Is there anything else that you'd like to say or say for posterity, or any overarching philosophy of
Well,
of life?
Well, I have had, I would say, basically a very good life. The only real bad thing that happened was when my daughter Lori was killed by a drunk driver. That's something that neither Sandy nor I have ever really gotten over. But the rest of our family, my son Steve and his family, have been very good. It's been a good marriage up until now. I think this September will be 65 years. 59. We were married in 59.
Yeah.
This is
20.
20. No, it
That's
won't.
nice.
It'll be 62 years.
Yes. Yeah,
62
yes.
years. So all I can say is that I've been retired since 57 and a half. Enjoyed every minute of it. Enjoyed the 30-some years I worked at the research center. Never regretted that a minute. I guess I would have to say that I have had a full and fulfilling life.
Good. As we sit here at your beach house.
Yeah, sitting
On the,
here looking out at people walking the sandbars, sun on the water, getting ready to go out on the deck to have lunch.
All right.
Yes, ciao.
Very nice.